雨に切なくネオン川恋の未練が絡み合う。それから仲良くなって奈良にゴルフ場を作るっていう計画を聞いてうちのママに紹介したんや。内藤から立石に応答願います。
おい、こちら立石だ、どうぞ。
黒田の女が現れました。
尾行します、どうぞ。
よし、すぐ。
On July 17, 1955, Disneyland Park in Anaheim, California opened its gates. The park was a near instant success and changed themed entertainment forever. Walt Disney had been told that his concepts for an elaborately themed entertainment park were unprofitable and that he was out of his element. Of course, Disneyland would be the biggest thing to ever happen to the theme park industry, and Disney theme parks are now the most popular theme parks in the world. Not long after the opening of Disneyland, Kunizo Matsuo, the president of the Japanese Matsuo Entertainment Company, flew to California to see the park for himself. He was more than impressed, and strongly believed a park like Disneyland would work perfectly in Japan. Matsuo became a mediator for the Japanese Dream Sightseeing Company, and got in direct contact with Walt Disney himself. Though Tokyo might have seemed the best location for a Disney park, Matsuo had a background as a kabuki actor, and was deeply invested in the history and culture of Japan, hence the proposed location of the country's former capital, Nara. Walt took to the idea of an international park, and agreed on building it in the city of Nara. Construction began on Nara Disneyland with the guidance of Walt and his creative team. The park was heavily influenced by Disneyland in Anaheim. It was designed in the same spoken wheel pattern and featured a replica of Sleeping Beauty Castle. Also in the hub was a great fountain and a small stage used for character shows and events. Nara Disneyland would feature a Main Street, a Fantasyland, a Tomorrowland, an Adventureland, and a unique Ancestorland in place of Frontierland. Park admission was to be free, and guests could experience attractions by purchasing tickets at ticket booths scattered throughout the park. Near the end of construction, Matsuo and Disney began to argue over licensing fees. An agreement needed to be reached for Matsuo to feature Disney properties in the park. The two were unable to compromise, and Disney pulled his support, meaning that Nara Disneyland had to be scrapped. However, the park was already near completion. Because of this, Matsuo quickly rebranded the park to Nara Dreamland, and new mascots were created in the form of Ran-chan and Dory-chan, two children dressed as British royal guards. While the end result was incredibly similar to Disneyland, there were still very few parks of its type in the world, and its design was especially unique to Japan, whose leisure industry was just beginning to recover after the devastation the country faced in and after World War II. The Happiest Place in Japan opened on July 1, 1961, and while those familiar with Anaheim's park might have seen a shoddy knockoff, the visitors saw a world of fantasy.
奈良は今歴史的な文化財とは別に新しい観光資源を開発し、規模の大きい観光地に飛躍しようとしています。子どもたちを対象にしたデラックス遊園地、アメリカのディズニーランドをモデルにしたと言われるだけに万事が大規模で日本離れしています。それだけにアメリカインディアンと古都奈良の佇まいは対照的でありすぎることも事実のようです。
At the park entrance, guests were greeted by Nara Dreamland's train station, which served as the sole stop for the Nara Dreamland Railroad. This narrow-gauge railroad took guests on a grand circle tour of the park, and journeyed through a tunnel that showcased a Wild West diorama. Upon entering the park, guests could then choose one of the 4 tunnels to take them to Main Street. This area included vehicles such as an omnibus, a fire engine, and horse-drawn carriages. The street included a town hall, a fire station, an opera house, a church, and a handful of shops and eateries. The focal point was the castle, which also functioned as the primary entrance to Fantasyland. Fantasyland included a classic carousel, a teacup ride, multiple boat attractions on a small lake, a haunted maze, and a skyway. Upon first glance, it might seem as though both the lake boats and the haunted maze were not Disney knockoffs. But this is only half true. When Disneyland first opened, it featured both the Phantom boats and the motorboat cruise, attractions similar to and probably the inspiration for Nara's boats. One of the boating attractions was Turtle Boat, a ride which took guests on small turtle-shaped boats that led them into Ryugu Palace to meet Princess Otohime and a group of mermaids. This was one of the many Nara Dreamland attractions to have its roots in Japanese history and folklore. Its design also drew inspiration from Disneyland's storybook land canal boats. The Haunted Maze predated Disneyland's Haunted Mansion by 8 years, although the classic Disney ride had been in development before Dreamland opened. The Haunted Maze's facade was shaped like a witch, a grotesque image, especially for the fantasy section of the park. The opening year brochure describes the attraction with the line, "Satan and many goblins await you." Guests were given a card upon entry to the maze and were challenged to find 3 checkpoints within the building to get the card stamped. The maze was very dark and had scattered theming, primarily skeletons behind metal bars. Fantasyland also featured an attraction called the Miracle House, a ride in which guests would enter a show building, board a small pirate ship, and fly over various scenes from around the world. This was clearly supposed to be Nara Disneyland's Peter Pan attraction before the licensing rights fell through. The Miracle House attraction would open with guests flying over the United States, Egypt, and the South Seas Islands. Fantasyland also had a variety of attractions added after the park's opening. These included a handful of kiddie attractions and carnival rides such as Flashdance, Pirate Swings, and Pirate Octopus. An update of the opening day teacup ride featured extra theming, more elaborate paint on the cups, and a canopy that covered the ride area. Fantasyland also saw the addition of 3 coasters over the years. In 1979, the famous Screw Coaster opened to the delight of park guests. This was the popular corkscrew model designed by Aero, with similar iterations found at parks such as Busch Gardens Tampa and Alton Towers. The Kids Coaster and Fantasy Coaster, both milder family rides, would later open on the northwest side of Fantasyland. Tomorrowland opened with a familiar popular attraction, Bobsleigh, a tubular steel coaster modeled after Disneyland's Matterhorn bobsleds. The mountain didn't just house the coaster, it also served as a midway point for Nara Dreamland's Skyway attraction that ran from Fantasyland to Tomorrowland, similar to Disneyland's setup at the time. In addition to Freeway, an Autopia-inspired attraction, Tomorrowland also had smaller family-friendly rides such as Astrojets, Loop-the-Loop, and a truly remarkable hovercrafts attraction, where guests could steer hovercrafts around a small lake near the bobsleigh. The land also opened with an attraction familiar to Disneyland fans, the Flying Saucers. This attraction sat guests in round seats on top of an oversized air hockey table. Guests could lean side to side to maneuver their seats over the air holes, with the goal being to bump the other guests. Some attractions added later on didn't quite fit the theming, such as Aero Development's Antique Car Ride attraction. Though Aero made many iterations of this classic ride, Nara stood out, as the ride vehicles were actually a combination of 2 different car models, the top portion of the Ford Touring car and the bottom portion of the Aero Cadillac, which may have been done to cut costs. The Antique Car Ride sat on the filled plot of the Submarine Voyage, a ride in which guests boarded a partially submerged submarine in a lagoon and journeyed into a show building. Tomorrowland also housed an unthemed classic log flume ride, which ran close to the monorail track. In 1998, Osku, a wooden coaster manufactured by Intamin and inspired by the classic Coney Island Cyclone coaster, opened on the border of Tomorrowland and Main Street. For a park that was starting to slump financially, Osku was a great addition to the park. Riders were surprised at just how good the coaster was, some claiming Nara Dreamland didn't deserve it. Adventureland sported a familiar wooden archway over its entrance and seemingly only ever housed one attraction, Jungle Cruise. This followed the same idea and plot as the Jungle Cruise at Disneyland. Guests embark on a cruise through the jungle to admire the local flora and fauna, only to end in a confrontation with a native tribe. Guests encountered a variety of animals, the skipper used a gun to scare away predators, and guests could delight in the backside of water. Ancestorland was Nara Dreamland's version of Frontierland, and it celebrated the history and culture of Japan. The land consisted of replicas of historical Japanese structures and was bordered by a river. Guests could take a variety of boat types along the river to navigate the land, as well as view miniature replicas of Japanese sites. The land ultimately served as a way for guests to take a trip through the rich history of Japan, and everything from samurai residencies, to markets, to brothels were represented in the area. Ancestorland ultimately met a sad fate, as it was demolished to make way for a water park area. Small remains such as shrines were left behind, though unkempt. The water park area that replaced it was pretty standard, and featured a variety of slides and pools. At its peak, Nara Dreamland brought in 1.63 million visitors a year. This led to its sister park, Yokohama Dreamland, to open in 1964. This park focused less on rides and more on entertainment and landscaping to entice guests. Despite that, Yokohama did sport a handful of attractions, which could also be ridden in exchange for tickets bought throughout the park. An opening day monorail, the Dream Development Dreamland line, was unique in that it made a stop at the railway station outside of the park itself. It was short-lived though, as cracks began forming in its support beams and repairs could not be made. After a year and 4 months of operation, all service of the line was suspended, and ultimately never returned. The park also featured 3 roller coasters, a Ferris wheel, a children's train ride, and a submarine voyage. Both parks were well loved, and their popularity proved that Japan was ripe for major theme parks. Unfortunately for Dreamland, this would also be its downfall.
I'm in Anaheim. Never mind the fact that it's actually 10 o'clock, but I won't get picky.
In 1983, a true Disneyland would finally open in Japan. Tokyo Disneyland came with immersive theming and creative properties that blew Nara out of the water. The knockoff was hit hard by Disneyland's opening, and attendance sank to 1 million guests a year. The park quickly suffered from lower budgets and poor upkeep, and by the mid-90s, the park was littered with trash, rides were standing but not operating, and stray animals could be found roaming the property. In 2001, both Tokyo Disney Sea and Universal Studios Japan opened. This was the final nail in the coffin for Nara Dreamland. Attendance slumped to a depressing 400,000 visitors a year. By 2004, the shops on Main Street were quickly closing. Building facades were noticeably rotting and beginning to lean from foundational issues. Rust gathered on the coasters, and small rides shut down but remained standing. Some attractions, such as the log flume in Tomorrowland, would operate despite no riders. Yokohama Dreamland was facing the same set of problems, and the park closed on February 17, 2002 due to the financial issues. The park sat abandoned for 3 years before the rides were dismantled and the remaining buildings were repurposed for the Yokohama School of Pharmacy. Nara Dreamland continued operation until August 31, 2006. The park's closing was made known, but few guests showed up to experience the final day of operation. Midway through the day, it began to rain, and most visitors headed home early. The park closed its gates and was left abandoned. Nara Dreamland was frozen in time, if anything, gaining visitors looking to explore the remains. The park gained a huge following online, with people taking pictures and videos of the creepy, abandoned Disney knockoff. On top of urban explorers, vandals also frequented the park. Aside from the expected graffiti, many of them moved the park's props around in order to depict sinister scenes. No initial effort was made to preserve what remained of Nara Dreamland, and unlike most amusement parks that close, no attractions were sold to other theme parks in the region. The Nara Dreamland property was put up for sale in 2011 with no bids. The property was foreclosed in 2014, and finally sold to SK Housing in 2015. Renovation remained stagnant for a while, supposedly due to the demolition being too expensive for SK Housing. After a year, demolition finally began, and the entire park was gone by December 21, 2017. All rides were scrapped and the ground was leveled to make way for senior housing. Nara Dreamland is most known for its abandoned state between 2006 and 2016, and is often believed to be the most elaborate Disney knockoff of all time. But it was so much more. The park began as the next Disneyland, with guidance from Walt Disney himself. It opened with immersive theming and rave reviews, and it paved the way for theme park companies to realize how profitable expanding overseas could be. While Nara Dreamland couldn't keep up with the giants in the entertainment industry, it should be remembered for its valiant attempt to bring magic and fantasy to a new part of the world.
僕たちの最高の思い出だよ。みんなありがとう。そうだね、ドリちゃん、ランちゃんが今言ってくれたみたいに、何よりもみんなの笑顔が最高の思い出だよね。本当に45年間ナラドリームランドを好きでいてくれて、皆さん本当にありがとうございました。